Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology, now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
Back in 2013, I made my way to the Ozarks to produce an episode of Dead Meat, where we snagged for paddlefish and ate them. It was during this experience I learned that you can't wrap everything in bacon and call yourself a chef. My next guest curates incredible plates to a whole nother level. Welcome to the podcast, Flavor on the Fly editor for Flylords, Kirk Marks. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kirk.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
And all the way from Kent Island. Is it Kent Island, Maryland?
Yep, that's it. Little island within the Chesapeake Bay.
I mean, I can just even see it right now. It just sounds like a beautiful novel set in the middle of nowhere. You got some beautiful oceans. You got rivers. I can't wait to even explore a little bit more about your home waters. But before we go into that, I'd love to hear a fishing story.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. I was thinking about a fishing story to share because I knew that's something you guys are into.
Totally into
as most fishermen and fisher women are. But so I wanted to talk about like my first red drum that I ever caught on the fly.
Awesome. We haven't had a red drum story yet, so this is great.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So it's a pretty cool story because I actually, when I graduated college, I went to Charleston, South Carolina with my family and my girlfriend and kind of made it a little side mission to try to catch a red drum down there. So we went to the fly shop, bought some flies, got some local intel, and just made a waiting mission out of it. But didn't strike up any red drum. So then fast forward about a year, I go down to Florida with one of my buddies who moved down to New Smyrna Beach area, originally from Kent Island too. And we're out on his canoe and we're looking around, seeing plenty of drum, but the drum down there are actually pretty spooky and wary. So I was just getting the fly like a little bit too close or a little bit too far, and just a lot of things kind of happened where they weren't going to connect with the fly. So after probably 20 attempts or so, it just ended up not happening that trip. And then a little bit of a side note on that trip. I'm also into photography, and we were fishing these impoundments for red drum, and we're driving up this road, and my buddy's like, okay, we're going to launch the canoe right here in this impoundment. So we unload everything, get the canoe in the water. I've got my camera bag, my tackle, my rods, and we get like 20 yards from where we launched, and my buddy's like, oh shit, this is the wrong impoundment. I'm like, oh, no worries, man. We'll pack everything back up. So we pack everything back up and head to the next impoundment, which is literally like not even a mile down the road. So we're unloading all the gear again, and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot my camera bag at the last impoundment. So we turn around and we go back there, and I forgot a paddle and my camera bag because we're just doing this quick load up. We hit the wrong spot, just a quick thing, put everything back in, go to the next one. So I wasn't really thinking, and I forgot my dry bag, which had my camera, my lens that was on my camera, and then another spare lens in there, and my wallet. So it's all in this one dry bag. And then a paddle for the canoe is also there. We turn back around, go to where we were, and the paddle's still there, but my bag is gone. And I'm like, oh, damn. So we go to, there's like a ranger station, not too far away. We go there, check in, nothing. No one reported anything. We kind of make our laps around the place for a little bit longer, asked a few people if they heard anything, saw anything, and no one had any intel. So I was being hopeful, and I was like, maybe someone will call, maybe something will happen, but it just never did. So then I had basically to go through security at the airport without my license, and then they ask you all these questions about your hometown and like, what's your mother's maiden name and what's a notable landmark within 5 miles of your house and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I got a little bit derailed there in Florida, but long story short, lost the camera, lost the bag, lost my wallet, and didn't catch a red drum.
Oh,
so
that was
a bit of a.
That was my question. I was like, did you at
reset.
least catch a red drum? Do we have a story? There is nothing worse. I have to say, like, losing your wallet, it can be just like, I mean, I've been a little bit better about not keeping personal information in my wallet anymore, because I think have this fear that someone's going to steal it and have like my social security number and know everything. But I guess, anyways, there's nothing worse feeling when you lose your wallet. And then on top of it, a camera. I mean, those things are so expensive.
Yeah, and I had some really sweet shots from the trip that I was bummed about too. I was like,
what do you think happened to it? Do you just think it went in the water and it's just gone? Or do you think someone like walked and picked it up?
No, yeah, it was, I remember I left it sitting by the roadside where we were kind of staging all of our gear. So yeah, someone definitely just snatched it. So yeah, wasn't the best feeling, but it was replaceable at the end of it. So.
Yeah, very true. But I have to say, I believe in karma. I bet you some bad things happened. Maybe when they opened up the camera, it just ended up, exploding on them or something like that. I believe in karma. It could not have ended well for them, okay?
So there's one more layer to the red drum story. It has a happy ending.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Went to Charleston, no red drum. Went to New Smyrna Beach, Florida, no red drum. Came back home, and I'm down in my home waters on the Chesapeake Bay. Actually, the lower bay, so I'm not up around Kent Island, but still the Chesapeake, near the mouth. And I'm kayak fishing with my buddies, and they're using spin gear. I'm using a fly rod, and we're on these clam. There's a couple channels, sandbars, and then some clam bags where they're doing like aquaculture facilities for clams. And out of nowhere, we just see a school of red drum, like anywhere from like 20 to 28 inches was kind of the size in the school. See them tailing, see them pushing wake. And I keep like paddling up to them, and they're a little bit out of range. My buddies on spin gear are all hooked up, and I'm just trying to cast the fly from my kayak, and they're like a little bit too far for me. So I'm kind of joking to my buddy, and we see a group of maybe like 6 of them kind of heading our way. I'm kind of joking to him, and I'm like, cast in there and pull the school my direction. So he casts in there, hooks up with one, and they end up doing exactly what I was kind of joking about. He's reeling it in, and they follow, and they come within like 20 yards of my kayak. I cast in, hook up on the fly, and then we're doubled up. He's on spin gear, I'm on the fly, and ended up catching my first red drum on fly right in my home waters of the Chesapeake Bay. So it was a roundabout way of doing it, but it came to actually happen right here in the Chesapeake, so it was pretty special.
Oh my gosh. I've never caught red drum before, but are they pretty tough fighting fish?
They are. They're very, very hard fighters. And I catch a lot of striped bass in the bay, which, are hard fighters as well.
Yeah.
Striped bass are like pretty sporadic, but red drum are just kind of like tanks. Like they don't do a whole lot of, change in direction or real agile maneuvers, but they are just like bulldogs and will just keep going straight away from you until you pull them, turn them, get them in.
Oh my gosh, I love it. But Kirk, as I stated in the very beginning, because it's amazing the dishes that you've come up with, and it's interesting because as someone who's watched other people cook, a lot of people think they can cook and they do wrap it up in bacon, and they're like, yeah, oh, I can make the best dish, and it's always wrapped in bacon. And there's so much more when it comes to complex animals, fish, whatever. You need to balance those seasons, and you have crafted some incredible plates. Can you tell me a little bit about Flavor on the Fly? I mean, let's hear about how did you cook one of these little guys up?
Yeah, so red drum are a species that's doing pretty well in the Chesapeake area, especially the lower bay. So you're allowed to keep them, and I kept that fish, and I'm real big on like field care and making sure you're doing everything you can in the field to make sure that when you get that fish back to the kitchen, it is in the best shape possible. So made sure to bleed that fish, just slice the gills with a knife or scissors or something, and actually put that fish back into the water after you've sliced it, because it's going to bleed out the meat from the flesh, or the blood from the flesh. And as that's happening, if you do it in open air, the blood will start to coagulate and kind of stop that process. So to keep it in the water allows the blood to just kind of pump out more. And that's really doing two things. It's making the taste of the fillet a little bit cleaner. And if you were to freeze the fish, it's going to last a little bit longer because you don't have that blood in there, which would spoil a little bit quicker. But it's also just going to kill that fish quickly and be, an ethical way to harvest that fish. So after I bled the fish, put it in a cooler with ice. And if you can put some salt water in the cooler, that's even better to get every surface of that fish surrounded by something cold. And if you put salt water like directly from the lower bay into your ice, it actually will get even colder than it would if it was just ice, because salt, kind of like how you put salts on the road for snow, at least around here they do that. It lowers the freezing temp of water, so you can have water that's below 32 degrees but still liquid. So it's a super cold solution, which is really good for keeping fish in. And then after all that's done and it's back in the, back in your kitchen, we filleted the fish and just kind of fried it like you would a standard fish, the fillets themselves. But there's this really good cut on a red drum that's often overlooked, which is called like the throat, or some people call it the collar. It's the area between where the pectoral fins are and the gill plates are, but on the underside of the fish.
Huh.
And there's a lot of good meat in there, and it actually has a different texture. It's a little bit more crab-like, and it's got a slightly different flavor, but still pretty fish. I mean, red drum has a fishy flavor, but it's good. I mean, you're eating fish. You should expect a little bit of that, I think.
I mean, you are eating fish. You should have it tastes like, it has a fishy taste to it. You're like, yeah, that is right. It is a fish.
Yeah, so often people think fishy and they're like, oh, that's like a negative connotation. I was like, you are eating fish, So
okay, so there's that like little crab meat, which is amazing because let's just be honest, I don't know. I went to the grocery store the other day and I was looking at king crab. Guess how much it was a pound? $75 a pound. And you're like in Montana, wow. So you're really paying for it. But I mean, I can't imagine how is it that expensive in Maryland?
To get something like Alaskan crab or Dungeness or something, I'm sure it would be comparable. But we have a lot of blue crabs around here. But they sell for what I think is ridiculous too, because I, go crabbing. My dad and I go crabbing, so we can get a bushel in a few hours. But yeah, I mean, a bushel of crabs around here is, upwards of $300.
Oh my gosh! What I love about looking at Flavor on the Fly is that what you talked about is sustainable, is like looking at your waters and making some incredible dish that you can get at like a fine restaurant. And I think that's what's so appealing for people, especially who are wanting to be more sustainable. Like, let's go out in the water, and whether that's elk hunting, fishing, it's like, how can we process our own food, without having to go to the market and spend $300 for something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, the more people are involved with their food, the more they have awareness and care. And the flavor on the fly dish I actually made with that drum was the collars. And I made, kind of a classic low country shrimp and grits recipe, but instead of shrimp, I used the red drum collars. And I really wanted to utilize that cut to highlight that there's more than just the fillet on this fish that you can use. A lot of people, just throw that cut back. It's like, yeah, the fillets are great, but there's all this other meat too, and you should probably utilize that if you're going to keep and kill a fish. Maximum utilization is always a good thing.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that, because my husband, he will bonk pike on the head and eat them, like make fish tacos. But on the other hand, we also go elk hunting, and every time I'm eating my elk, I will eat every single piece of that elk, because I'm also very sensitive to the fact that there is an animal that we took their life, and I want to make sure to honor it. And also, it was so hard packing that elk out. So much hours put onto it. I'm like, I'm not going to throw any piece of this meat away. I'm going to digest it, and my kids are going to eat it, and everyone's going to eat this elk, and we're all going to enjoy it. But it is so interesting that when you work so hard, and especially even fly fishing, I mean, the amount of flies that you sometimes have to change, and the amount of energy that goes into reading the waters, you want to invest into, I don't know, it just means a whole lot more when you're eating it,
Yeah, I agree. Yep, 100%. That's awesome that you guys get the elk out there.
Oh,
that's
man.
on my bucket list for sure.
Absolutely love it. Like and we hunt hard. I mean, elk hunting, I think we tracked in for 3 days, 26 miles of hard hunting. And
Wow.
The funny thing is, where we shot the elk was, random. We saw some elk, went hiking a mile and shot it, so it's funny how it can sometimes turn out that way. But it is one of those things that is, you get it, every time I do it, I'm like, I'm not going to do this again. This is so hard. My body hurts. It's so much work. It's hard country. And then as soon as we have harvested an elk and we're back in the truck, we're planning the next season. I'm like, I can't wait to get back out there. It's a drug.
It's that second level fun. Sometimes it's a grind when you're doing it, but you look back so fondly on it.
Yeah. It's interesting, because the reason why sometimes I don't want to fillet fish is because of the fishy smell on my hands, and also the bones. And I know there's so many techniques where people are like, hey, I've got it figured out, where I can fillet a fish and have the less amount of bones in your dish. Do you have a trick when it comes to filleting fish?
Well, it's every fish is different, and a lot of fish have different anatomy when it comes to their pin bones. Like you mentioned, you guys eat pike, and I know they're very bony fish.
Oh, I know. It's every time we're eating, we're like, just chomp a little slower, kids.
Right. Well, I did another flavor on the fly. I don't really have any great filleting tips, just because each fish is its own beast. So you got to know where the pin bones are, if you can avoid them. If it's a big fillet, like needle nose pliers are great. You can just kind of pluck them out. Otherwise, you just kind of make a little thin slice around them sometimes. But I did do a flavor on the fly piece that was about pickerel, and similar to pike, they have a ton of bones. And if you try to debone them, at the end of it, you're pretty much left with not a lot of meat. So the recipe was pickled pickerel, which has a good ring to it, but it's also pretty tasty. And when you put a pickerel fillet, or chunked up pickerel fillet, in an acidic pickling brine, the brine actually dissolves the pin bones. So after the brining process is complete, you're left with these chunks of pickerel that you can put, with a slice of pickled jalapeno and pickled red onion and on a cracker, and it's completely boneless, and it's pretty tasty.
Oh, Oh, interesting. I was also looking at all the stuff that you have created, and I thought one of the other interesting ones, because we did an episode on snakehead, and I was like, wow. And I personally, the people that were trying to cook it had a little bit of difficult level trying to make the flavors blend really well. When you see, when you've caught a fish and you're like coming up with a recipe, are you looking at blending flavors, or like how do you create a recipe with the flavors that you have, especially with snakehead? I find that to be pretty difficult.
Well, let me first just say, like, I don't have any like formal culinary experience. I worked in a fine dining restaurant for a number of years, but I've never like taken culinary classes or anything. It's just kind of been self-taught and passed down from the people around me, including my parents, which are both great wild game cooks.
Don't all the best cooks that's how they become the best cooks? It's just through experience?
Well, here's to hoping.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really, when I'm trying to decide on a recipe for a new species, the first thing I'll do is just cook that fish as simply as possible, just to get a basis on what kind of flavors that it has, what kind of texture does it have. So, if I caught my first snakehead, fillet it, cook it in a pan with oil and salt and pepper. Just try to get a sense of what that fish is like, and then realize how can you expand that. So snakehead, the flesh kind of resembles like a saltwater fish more than it does a freshwater fish.
Yeah.
In that it's pretty steaky and it's not real mushy, and it's going to hold up. So it's a great fish for baking. And one of my most recent Flavor on the Flies was actually like a Greek baked fish dish with onions and tomatoes and Kalamata olives and tomato sauce, and it was a great fish for that because it held up through the baking process. It's in the oven for like 45 minutes, and if you do that with something more delicate, it's just going to fall apart and become mush. So yeah. I think a great way to kind of hone in a recipe is to just first start out with a blank slate and try to figure out what that fish tastes like without anything else added to it.
Has there been a fish that you created or like that you cooked that surprised you, like in either a good way or a bad way?
I think actually snakehead is a good one to talk about for that. I know you said it was a little difficult for the folks you were around, but when I had snakehead, I was pretty blown away at how good it was, mainly texturally. It was a pretty mild flavor, but I was like, man, this is like eating something steaky, like a swordfish or a cobia or something, like in the texture of it. And I was like, it lives in a swamp with 6 inches of water sometimes, so it's pretty wild. But yeah, that they're a good fish, and I think that there's a little bit, at least in my area, where there's a lot of them in Maryland, there's an effort from the restaurant industry to try to get people excited about snakehead. A lot of these like fine dining, like field to table, locally harvest, like type restaurants, locally sourced, you'll find snakehead on the menu there, and it's a pretty penny, and people are paying for it. And just in my friend group and just the general fishing culture in Maryland, snakehead are revered as a very good eating fish. So it's been pretty cool to see that happen.
That is so cool.
Years.
How do you catch them?
They're difficult, and we're still learning, really, because we don't have like years of historical knowledge. So about 20 years ago, the first snakehead appeared in Maryland in a small pond, and since then they've moved to some surrounding tributaries and river systems, and they're pretty much everywhere now that it's relatively fresh and low current water. But the way that I fish for them mainly is by using topwater lures.
Okay.
When I'm fly fishing for them, topwater poppers or something, but you have to have it real weedless because they like to be in the thickest, most algae-ridden waters around, real thick grass. So it's a challenge. I will say I've caught far more on spin tackle than I have fly, but I have caught some on fly, and one of my goals for this year is to catch like a 10-pounder on fly.
Oh my gosh, how cool! Because I mean, I've never heard of anyone catching a snakehead on the fly, but it's interesting because they're part of the burbot family with the eelpout, right?
I don't
Are they
know.
similar?
They do look very much like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're in some different family just because the way they behave. I really don't know.
Because they look like eelpout, but I think I don't know. I'm not a scientist when it comes to it, but in Brainerd, Minnesota, they have the Eelpout Festival, and everybody just goes out there and whacks a bunch of eelpout. And I don't know. And then I think they do eat them, but I was thinking if you guys were trying to get rid of some snakeheads, maybe you have the Snakehead Festival in Maryland. And I think there's like a competition in Brainerd, like whoever catches the biggest eelpout ends up being I think a lot more of a party than anything. But also, I mean, how fun to just say I'm going to an Eelpout Festival or a Snakehead Festival. That could be something you could put together, Kirk. I'm very convinced you should be doing that.
Definitely. Is there a dead meat episode about the eelpout?
Oh yeah. I think they did it twice, like episode season 1 and season 2. And I'm always behind the scenes. And no, I got invited once to go and help produce a show, and I was so excited because I'm like, I'm always behind the scenes, right? The host was like, "Hey, Lauren, you want to come and go paddle fishing?" And I had such a great time, and they already caught their paddlefish, and so we were just snagging. And it's interesting, right? Paddlefish are the coolest looking. I'm obsessed with paddlefish, but just drag like a thing, you just snag them, and they look like dinosaurs. But when we ate them, interesting thing, they have no bones, and so they just kind of like
cartilage fish, right?
Yeah, and so they didn't taste like anything. I mean, I think if you put salt on it or pepper or what, it just tasted like the seasoning. And also it's and they've changed the dead meat, but back in seasons 1 and 2, it would be the guests would cook for them. And so it was people also with no culinary backgrounds, but everyone just always wrapped things in bacon. Everyone's like, here's a piece of bacon. And so and with that though, like, I think what makes you a better chef is when you start taking things without wrapping bacon, right? Like, you have to get out of your box. And that's also with fly fishing, right? Like, you have to look at your box. If you aren't catching your fly box, if you aren't catching the fish, you have to like change it up, right? Like, let's add some streamers, or let's add a hopper. Like, what else we can try here? And I think that's with being a cook, you have to really kind of get outside of your box of like what you think would taste good, and that's where I see with Flavor on the Fly is that you're just trying different things and dishes. I'm like, wow, that looks amazing. I would never think of that those would complement each other. Like the relish, like, it's so beautiful, and it's an artist piece to it. Well,
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Lauren. It's been fun to develop that series, and there's no sign of it stopping, so there should be plenty of more to come.
I'm happy to hear that. How did you get into with Flylords? Were you just like, hey, I'm gonna write this Flavor on the Fly piece and let's get this rolling?
Essentially, they had an opening, just like a standard job opening that they posted for a culinary writer, or food writer, I think they called it. And one of my good buddies was already working with Flylords a little bit, so he forwarded it to me, and he was like, dude, this sounds right up your alley. Check this out. And I applied. I think I applied a little late, and they had someone else already online for the gig, but they fell through, and then they reached out to me, and they just said, we just want a recipe, a monthly recipe. And it didn't start out as Flavor on the Fly. It was just like, this is how to cook this fish. But then we rebranded it a little bit to try to make it an actual series where it's, it's a little bit of a fishing tale, fishing story, adventure.
Yes.
Followed up with a recipe, and I do not all of it, but I do the majority of the photography for those pieces too. So, all of the adventures are from me pretty much solely with the recipe and the photography. I have a few friends that I reach out to for photography as well when I'm lacking some photos. But it's a pretty grassroots thing, and it's been really fun to see it, gain some traction, and just really cool to hear that you're excited about it. So yeah, it must be reaching some folks.
Absolutely. What is the process when you're deciding to write an article for Flavor on the Fly? Like, do you already have an idea of what you're going to catch, what you're going to cook, the adventure, or how do you set up that process?
I basically just have like a little note sheet that I write down all of the different fishing opportunities in my general area for the course of a year. And then I'm like, how am I going to make this a cool piece, a cool recipe, a cool something? And it gets a little tough, especially in like, January, February, March, those slow months. But I basically just try to figure out what Maryland has to offer, and make something cool based on that. Some of the recipes, I'm developing for the series. Some of the recipes are things I've been cooking for years, and now I get the chance to share them with a broader audience.
Do you ever think you'll ever like make your way outside of Maryland and like try and explore some other places and try and cook some pike or maybe some paddlefish?
I really hope so. I can't speak too much to it, but we have some things in the works, and hopefully we can expand this series to not only just print or just like a article. We are hoping to maybe one day get to the point where it can be a video series, where I can go fish with a couple different guides or just culinary folks who like to cook and like to fish around the country and kind of experience these other fisheries that I would love to get out to and have a chance to connect with.
Well, I think everybody's looking at being more sustainable, and I think if we could have that reach other people around, the country, it's like, hey, these are what my home waters are like. What can I do in order to make this dish delish?
Absolutely, yeah.
But, we talk about your home waters, and, I have family in Boston and Swampscott, and, the East Coast is so beautiful. And I have no clue about anything about Kent Island, Maryland. But it, like I said in the very beginning, it sounds like I can already picture in my mind what I think it looks like and smells like. But give me a little bit more description about your home waters.
Okay, yeah. So Kent Island is a relatively small island. I wish I knew the square mileage off the top of my head, but I don't. But it's probably around 10 miles long by 3 miles wide. At its thickest point, it's probably 3 miles wide.
Wow.
So it's pretty small. And the Chesapeake Bay Bridge is kind of a large, it's like a landmark that people, photograph. And in our neck of the woods, it's a pretty prominent structure. So
it's going to be on a lot of magnets, right? It's going to be like anytime you go to a shop.
Postcards,
it's going to be on a lot of magnets and keychains.
Exactly. Magnets, keychains, postcards. It's got all that going for it. But it goes from the western shore to the eastern shore. And when it lands on the eastern shore, it lands on Kent Island. And then you have to go another 3 miles, and then you take another little bridge onto the mainland. But Kent Island is nestled in the upper part of the bay, mid to upper part of the bay. And the Chesapeake Bay is just so special because it has a range of salinity. So, the more northern portions of the bay have different fish species than, the southern portions of the bay. So in the northern portions, you can catch, especially, the Susquehanna River is the biggest tributary of the bay. So if you go up the Susquehanna River, you can catch smallmouth bass, and, just
amazing.
Largemouth bass, and snakehead are up there now, all kinds of stuff. And then rockfish, which we striped bass. We locally here in the Chesapeake refer to them as rockfish. Kind of confusing, but they go up there to spawn, and throughout different times of the year, just different fish are in the bay. So around Kent Island, there's a lot of striped bass, a lot of white perch, a lot of croaker, more so in previous years, but there's still some around, and flounder.
Wow.
And then you go a little bit more south towards the mouth of the bay, and you can catch red drum and cobia and, spade fish, more flounder, mackerel, those kind of things. And we have a really phenomenal cobia fishery, which is getting a little bit, it's like blowing up a little bit, and I'm a little bit worried for them now because a lot of people are onto it. But it's a really cool thing where you can actually sight fish for them. So you're up in a tower boat, just kind of prowling along, and you can see them and cast to them, and they're really hard fighters and really, really good eating fish. I think the thing they do have going for them is the fact that they grow really fast. So, if management needs to change in the coming years, I feel like it'll be a pretty quick rebound, hopefully.
That's good.
But yeah, there's just so much diversity in the bay. And then if you follow the tributaries far enough to their headwaters, you can even get into some brook trout fishing right here in Maryland. So really runs the gamut on the fish diversity. And then there's the Atlantic Ocean, which I haven't even spoke about. But yeah, I mean, the Atlantic Ocean, you sea bass, mahi-mahi, you go out far enough, tuna, swordfish, all kinds of stuff like that.
Oh my gosh. And have you caught all of these fish?
I have not caught most of the ocean fish. I don't have connections with any deep sea guys, really. But all the other ones I mentioned, yep.
Well, you know what they say about a boat? If you bought one, they say bring out another 1,000 is what they call that. So, I mean, you kind of have to have a buddy that has a reliable boat to go deep sea fishing, because that'd be the most terrifying. Actually, I think I went. Actually, you know what? When I was in Boston, they're like, Lauren, you need to go whale watching. We're going to go whale watching. I was like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to do that. And sure enough, we go whale watching. And I've never experienced that feeling before of being in the middle of the ocean and there's no land at all. I mean, it was terrifying, and I just got so seasick. Not because of the waves, just because I was like, where's the land? I don't know. I would have been a horrible captain. I'd be a horrible pirate. So it's a good thing I'm just back out west. But that stuff kind of terrifies me.
It's a huge, large expanse, and you feel kind of hopeless out there if you don't trust your captain or your equipment and stuff.
And the boat.
Pretty much everyone around here that runs offshore has at least 2 outboards on their boat. You just, for redundancy, just making sure you can get back in.
Now, Kirk, if people are wanting to kind of follow on your journeys, especially maybe figuring out what the next flavor on the fly is going to be, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm pretty active on Instagram. My name on there is at Kirky Marks, KirkyMarks. That was just a little childhood nickname that my parents and family always called me, but it's
a
stuck,
great nickname.
Yeah. So Kirky Marks on Instagram, and then Flylords. Flylords on Instagram, Flylords website. If you just look at my profile, I forward and share a lot of the flavor on the fly stuff there, and I have the little Linktree website that has all of the recipes that I've done. So either way you go about it, at my own personal site or the Flylords site directly, you can find the flavor on the fly stuff. But if you come to my site, you can see some personal photography too, which I'm pretty passionate about as well.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com, where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.